Okay, we're going to look at the demonstration now of the Ansible spoke. If you came to this video through the blog site, then you will have seen the steps required to set up the spoke. If you came to this video through YouTube, then there's a link in the description to see the steps required to set up the Ansible spoke. So this video is just purely going to demo the spoke being used. So the use case here is a service catalog request in ServiceNow to allow users to install a monitoring agent on their Linux boxes and to select the relevant monitoring profile they want. Off the back of the approval, it will then send the request through to Ansible Automation Platform to go and configure that monitoring agent. We'll then go back into ServiceNow and update the request. So we've kind of got that zero touch provisioning for users. So a couple of things to show. Firstly, we're in Automation Controller here. If I go to job templates, we can see that I already have configured a Sensu agent job template. So this is the job that's going to be launched to install the Sensu monitoring agent. The other thing that I've got here is a ServiceNow inventory. So we're going to query the ServiceNow CMDB, discover the hosts that are in the CMDB, use that information as a source of truth to automate against. If we go into Sensu monitoring and I search for the host that we're about to install the agent on, we can see the host grafana.pharrisho.demolab.local is not currently configured in our Sensu monitoring platform. And then onto ServiceNow. So first thing I want to do is look at the CMDB. So if we go and look at the Linux host in the CMDB, here are my three target hosts that I could potentially install my agent on. So these are all configured and ready to go. So let's go and look at the catalog request itself. So if I go and search for install Sensu, we have our request here that we've already configured. And now the user has the two prompts that we configured earlier. So firstly, we have a lookup here against that CMDB. So if you remember a few seconds ago, I just showed the Linux host in the CMDB. This is what we're querying and providing the user as a dropdown. And then the second question here is the monitoring profile to assign. Again, this is a query from a custom table that's in ServiceNow. So the user just picks from existing tables in ServiceNow. So we can go ahead and order that item. We've got a request ID here, which I'm going to copy, and we can go and look at that request ID. So here's that request. We can see it hasn't been approved yet, which means that we shouldn't see any activity in Automation Controller at this point. So let's go into Automation Controller and look at the current running jobs. There's nothing currently running, basically. So I didn't set up any approval workflows in this because it was sort of beyond the scope of what I wanted to cover. So I'm just going to kind of manually put this into an approved state and update it. And what we should see is some activity here in Automation Controller. So now we can see the jobs are launching. The first thing we're doing is this inventory sync. So we're querying that CMDB, grabbing a list of hosts, making sure that the host we're running this against is actually a valid host in the CMDB. And then the second job is going to go and run through and install the monitoring agent. So a few things to note here. So if you remember, we prompted the user for a monitoring profile. That's being passed in here as a variable now so that we can use that to configure the host in the right way. We're also passing through the ServiceNow request ID because we need that to go back into ServiceNow at the end of this and update the ticket to say whether or not we've completed the request or not. I'll copy that for a moment. And then finally here, if we look here, this limit field here that we're highlighting, this was the target host that we wanted to run the automation against. We're limiting the execution to that single host. So we're not running it against everything in the CMDB, which clearly we don't want to do. We just want to target a specific host. So we used that field from the CMDB in the catalog to limit the execution to this single host. So if we go and look at the job execution, we can see the job has run through successfully, made a few changes to the configuration and made sure the agent's running. We can also see at the end here, the last task was to update the ServiceNow request. So let's go and back into ServiceNow firstly and query, have a look at that request item. We should see now that the request is in a closed complete state. And if we scroll down, we added a little update in there to say that we installed the agent using the Ansible automation platform. So we've updated the ticket and passed in the latest information on what we've done here. If we go back into the sensor monitoring platform, and I may have to just run this query again, we should hopefully see now that we now have our Grafana host being monitored here in sensor monitoring. So we can see it's got the HA proxy profile here. And if we go and click on it, we can see it's red because one of the checks is failing. It doesn't actually have HA proxy installed, but that doesn't matter. So that was all being delivered through the Ansible spoke, and that's the end of that demonstration.